The notion of a U.S. war on terrorism is simply a fraud. There is no war on terrorism. The Anglo-Americans are backing terrorists exactly when and where it suits them, from Chechnya to Cuba to other points around the world. This is a typical British strategy. You've got to know the name of Brigadier General Sir Frank Kitson. He was the British operations officer in Kenya at the time of the Mau Mau. And what Kitson saw, which has been known to commanders for centuries, millennia, if you've got an underground nationalist organization and you want to discredit them, you create your own parallel underground nationalist organization. You send them out, it's got to have the same name, it's got to have a false flag. You send them out, have it commit tremendous atrocities. Those will be blamed on the original relatively benign group, and they'll be discredited, they'll be demonized, and you gain political advantage. He wrote a book about it called Low Intensity Operations. And the technique is called the technique of the counter gang or the pseudo gang. Just as Al-Qaeda, in the broader sense, is a pseudo gang or counter gang created by US and British and Israeli intelligence. It's a counter gang against normal Arab nationalists or anybody with any positive agenda for reform or independence or development anywhere in the Arab world. They can always be labeled Al-Qaeda. The reductio ad absurdum of this is President Chavez of Venezuela, after giving Bush a hard time at various conferences and doing things to undermine the dollar, the neocons are now accusing President Chavez of being a member of Al-Qaeda. So you can see how easy it is to demonize somebody once you've got a good counter gang going. There's an oligarchical consensus in the United States, inspired by the neocons, inspired by Samuel Huntington and the rest of them, which is that without an enemy image, you cannot have an oligarchical society. Ultimately, that's the why, because if you look at this, you say, terrorism, endless war, why, who benefits? Those who benefit are the beneficiaries of the current system, financiers primarily. They feel that without the diversion of a war, they cannot maintain social relations, property relations, in the current form, and this they are determined to do. So they have manufactured, in a complete hysteria, a largely fictitious external enemy. You remember 1984 by George Orwell. Julia at one point says, I don't even think there is a war, it's just a fake to keep people under control. Orwell, I think, had a very good understanding of some of these psychological mechanisms. When you see Bush defend his Iraq policy, you will see that he does not use Iraq arguments in terms of closing the deal. When it comes to the heart of the matter, he uses 9/11 arguments. If he's asked, why did 2,000 people have to die in Iraq for no reason? The answer is 9/11, the lessons of 9/11. I know it's hard, but these are the lessons of 9/11. With that kind of demagogy, he's able to keep a hard core of 30 to 35% of the American public. With 30 to 35%, he will be able to stay in office and wage war indefinitely. He'll be able to go for a wider war. He can manufacture new 9/11s to firm up that base. He and Cheney can provoke incidents that will lead to war with Iran, with Syria, with Venezuela, with North Korea. There's no limit to this. It has no bounds. The only way to begin to attrit and to erode and to break up his 30 to 35% base is to begin dismantling the myth of September 11th.
Robert Steele, a former U.S. Marine CIA officer and co-creator of the Marine Corps Intelligence Center. He's author of the Open Source Everything Manifesto, Transparency, Truth, and Trust. Robert, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Max, it's a real pleasure to be back. Number two, most terrorists are false flag terrorists or are created by our own security services. Now, I have no direct access in England, but I will tell you that here in the United States, every single terrorist incident we have had has been a false flag or has been an informant pushed on by the FBI. In fact, we now have citizens taking out restraining orders against FBI informants that are trying to incite terrorism. We've become a lunatic asylum. As far as Jihadi John, The best guess that I can give you is that this is funded by Saudi Arabia, trained by CIA. This destruction of ancient artifacts and so on, that's a covert action influence operation. That's not something they would normally do. This is, in one word, largely theater.
All right, Robert, let me...
Again, intelligence community, one of the odd things about that, I talk about it at good length in my book, since I was at one time a consultant to the old Office of National Estimates of the CIA, and do know actually something about it. Intelligence organizations don't do intelligence. They're private armies of executives. That's the clandestine side of things dominates. It wags, the tail wags the dog in the CIA. That is, the intelligence is worthless, as we now know in numerous cases. But that doesn't for a moment stop the funds flowing there. And that trails off and intersects quite easily with the world of organized crime, in that the methods of clandestine activities, of overthrow of governments, of provocateurs in which you incite people to riot, have your own snipers kill a few of them, and then say that innocent bystanders were killed by the government you want overthrown. We've used that ploy so many times, from Jakarta to Caracas just recently, that it's almost insane to believe that you could see, Dan Rather putting it out once again that innocent bystanders were shot by thugs of the Chavez regime, which he said, just last year, when it's standard operating procedure in overthrowing a place like Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973, or things of this sort, as well as, of course, even as we know in the case of John Kennedy and his animosity against Fidel Castro, the actual use of known mobsters in the attempt, in proposed assassination attempts. Again, the purpose here not being to avoid the onus of assassination, but to avoid the onus of pulling the trigger yourself. It is also another standard American ploy, is to have the CIA up with a complicit military organization in which they're giving the orders, but the other people are doing it. This is, for example, you'll recall just a couple of years ago, the shooting down of an airplane over Peru that was filled full of American Baptist missionaries, that was interdicted by a CIA control plane that sent in the Peruvian Air Force to shoot it down. Well, that's very similar to the Phoenix program throughout the Vietnam War, where we killed thousands of people in similar sorts of ways. So that the other thing that I think is dangerous in all of this is to just put in to remind people once again of one of the greatest scandals in the country, and that's something called the School of the Americas, located on the base of Fort Benning, Georgia, in which we have for now decades trained thousands of thugs in state terrorism throughout Latin America. I strongly recommend to all of your viewers to look up the brilliant School of the Americas watch, www.soaw.com. And well, there you can also look up any name of a Latin American leader, Mr. Montesinos, say, recently deposed in Peru, and find out that he not only taught at the School of Americas, he taught there twice. He was so good he was invited back on how to basically produce state terrorism in places like Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador during the 1980s. So that one begins to wonder what is left for organized crime, since we've taken it over with arms sales, with the intimidation of population, the protection racket. I mean, used to be, that is, the Chicago mobsters used to basically say, you've got to pay us to be protected. Protected from whom? From us. Well, that's very largely what America's operations today in about 130 of 170 countries in the United Nations amount to, is the protection racket. And remember, what the citizens of these countries see of the United States are uniformed special forces troops, not State Department officials, not AID officials, not even businessmen. The ones they run into most commonly And inevitably, as a matter of elementary logic, have to conclude the Americans think in terms of enforcing their policies not through diplomacy, not through persuasion, but through the use of military force. That is, that's what you see of the United States today. That's in a certain sense what one again means by blowback, the disjunction between what we think we're doing in the world and what people on the receiving end know that we are actually doing, and the kinds of attitudes that they generate. I'm sorry to say, but it is true. I think today the demise of the American empire would be no more regretted in the world than was the demise of the Soviet Empire, which was not regretted anywhere.
My expertise, as you know, is CIA, Marine Corps, 3 CIA secret wars. I had a position in the National Security Council in 1975 as the chief of the Angola task force running the secret war in Angola. It was the 3rd CIA secret war I was part of. The National Security law creating the National Security Council and the CIA, as you know, was passed in 1947. The CIA was given this charter to perform such other duties and function as might be necessary to the national security interests, and given a vague authority to protect its sources and methods. And I think it was in the mid-'80s that I coined this phrase, the Third World War, because in my research I realized that we were not attacking the Soviet Union and the CIA's activities. We were attacking people in the Third World. And I'm going to just quickly, in the interest of time, just give you a little sense of what that means, this Third World War. Basically, it's the third, I believe, in terms of loss of life and human destruction, the third bloodiest war in all of history. They undertake to run operations in every corner of the globe. They also undertook the license of operating just totally above and beyond U.S. laws. They had a license, if you will, to kill, but also they took that to a license to smuggle drugs, a license to do all kinds of things to other people in other societies in violation of international law, our law, and every principle of nations working together for a healthier and more peaceful world. Meanwhile, again, they battled to convert the U.S. legal system in such a way that it would give them control of our society. Now, we have massive documentation of what they call the secret wars of the CIA. We don't have to guess or speculate. We had the Church Committee investigate them in 1975, gave us our first really in-depth, powerful look inside this structure. Senator Church said in the 14 years before he did his investigation that he found they had run 900 major operations and 3,000 minor operations. And if you extrapolate that over the whole period of the 40-odd years that we've had a CIA, you come up with 3,000 major operations and over 10,000 minor operations. Every one of them illegal, every one of them disruptive of the lives and societies of other peoples, and many of them bloody and gory beyond comprehension almost. Extensively, we manipulated and organized the overthrow of functioning constitutional democracies in other countries. We organized secret armies and directed them to fight in just about every continent in the world. We encouraged ethnic minorities to rise up and fight, people like the Mosquito Indians in Nicaragua, the Kurds in the Middle East, the Monks in Southeast Asia. We have organized, and we still do, and fund death squads in countries around the world, like the Treasury Police in El Salvador, which are responsible for most of the killing of the 50,000 people just in the 80s, and there was 70,000 before that. And orchestration, CIA, secret teams, and propaganda led us directly into the Korean War. We were attacking China from the islands Quemoy, Matsu, Thailand, Tibet. A lot of drug trafficking involved in this, by the way, until eventually we convinced ourselves to fight the Chinese in Korea, and we had the Korean War, and 1 million people were killed. Same thing for the Vietnam War, and we have extensive documentation of how the CIA was involved at every level, or the national security complex, because it's a very cooperative thing, into manipulating the nation into the Vietnam War. And we wound up creating the Golden Triangle, in which the CIA, Air America airplanes, were flying in arms to our allies and flying back out with heroin. We launched the largest, this is something that Jimmy Carter did, Admiral Turner brags about it, the operation in Afghanistan. Biggest single operation, I'm told, in the history of the CIA's secret wars. And sure enough, very quickly we produced the Golden Crescent, which is still the largest source of heroin perhaps in the world today. Trying to summarize this Third World War that the CIA, the U.S. national security complex with the military all interwoven in it in many different ways, has been waging. Let me just put it this way. The best heads that I coordinate with studying this thing, we count at least minimum figure 6 million people who've been killed in this long 40-year war that we've waged against the people of the Third World. These are not Soviets. We have not been parachuting teams into the Soviet Union to kill and hurt and maim people, especially not since 1954 when they developed actually a capability of dropping atomic weapons on the United States. They aren't British, French, Swedes, Swiss, Belgians. We don't do bloody, gory operations in the countries of Europe. These are all people of the Third World. They're people of countries like the Congo, Vietnam, Kampuchea, Indonesia, Nicaragua, where conspicuously they nor their governments do not have the capability of doing any physical hurt to the United States. They don't have ICBMs. They don't have armies or navies. They could not hurt us if they wanted to. There has rarely been any evidence that they really wanted to. And that, in fact, is perhaps the whole point. If they had had ICBMs, we probably wouldn't have done the things to them for fear of retaliation. Cheap shots, if you will, killing people of other countries of the world who cannot defend themselves under the guise of secrecy and under the rubric of national security.
Is the CIA an army of individuals who have a license to kill? It's like Murder Incorporated, right?
Oh, are you kidding? The CIA makes the mafia look like a Sunday school class. I mean, this is the problem with what's actually happening in Afghanistan. Look, the CIA has done in this country, what they've done to us is unbelievable. Look at the terrorist acts that have occurred. The CIA behind most, if not all of them. We had the Marine barracks. We had our embassy in Kenya. We had Pan Am 103. We had the USS Cole. We had Oklahoma City. We had the World Trade Center in 1993. Our government was involved in some of those. I can't say all of them because I don't know, but I do have documentation that there was government implication in some of these. And we'll discuss them as we go.
Well, Ted, the people out there, I mean did you know that the World Trade Center went up when it was bombed internally? That it all was put together by an organization called the FBI.
Is that this 1993?
93.
Yeah. Yes. I have and I'll show this on camera, a newspaper article from the New York Times, and it was also an article in the LA Times, by the way, and it's dated October 28, 1993, and it's a result of testimony in the trial, and the informant, the FBI informant in the trial, a fellow named Salam, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer.
Imad Salam.
Right, he was the informant for the FBI, and he recorded his conversations secretly, so when it came time for trial, he said, hey, wait a minute, here's what really happened. Now, he told the FBI in advance that they were going to bomb it. He was assigned, given the assignment to put the bomb together, and he went to his supervisor, his FBI supervisor, and said, we're going to put a dummy bomb in here, right? And the FBI supervisor said, no, we're going to put a real bomb.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's name names. John Antisef.
Was the supervisor.
Yeah, he was the supervisor for the FBI, and he winds up in with having something to do with the Kenya investigation. So here's a guy who's involved in setting up the World Trade Center for to be blown up, and it resulted in the deaths of six individuals, over 1,000 injured, nearly $100 million.
$500 million.
A lot of millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars, yeah.
And
in debt property damage.
Right. Now, if justice were done, the FBI agent would be not only in jail, but executed for murder in the first degree. And is the chief suspect in the attack upon the World Trade Center on September 11th, is not the chief suspect the individuals or individual agency that bombed the World Trade Center in 1993?
Based on what happened in 1993, the FBI not only knew in advance they were going to bomb the World Trade Center, they furnished the ingredients for the bomb. Based on that, I would say that the FBI is the primary suspect, but also I think we have to consider the CIA.
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work. And it was President Reagan, in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated. They lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which is, wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow because we will harvest. So we then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine, you deal with the stingers that we've left all over your country. You deal with the mines that are along the border. And by the way, we don't want to have anything to do with you. In fact, we're sanctioning you. So we stopped dealing with the Pakistani military and with ISI, and we now are making up for a lot of lost time.
Hillary Clinton has described already the meeting in the White House over 2 years ago. Everyone in the national security team recommended arming ISIS.
Yesterday, video was released of what appears to be American aid that was supposed to be dropped for the Kurds to fight ISIS, but surprise, surprise, it ended up in ISIS's hands. Let's take a look.
ذخائر معدات عسكرية معدات إضافية هذه بعض الأسلحة العسكرية التي ألقتها القوات الأمريكية للأحزاب اليابجية واليابكية.
Okay, so that hasn't been independently confirmed, so it's a little unclear when exactly that was dropped. Some people are saying some of the stuff may be from somewhere else, but it's clear that a lot of it is American-made.
Somebody who has over decades trained some of the most prominent foreign policy specialists, not just in the Democratic Party, but has trained a number who ended up in the Republican Party as well. He is one of our most outstanding scholars, one of our most outstanding thinkers. He has proven to be an outstanding friend and somebody who I've learned an immense amount from. And for him to support me in this campaign and then be willing to come out here to Iowa is a testimony to his generosity. So if everybody could please give Dr. Brzezinski another round of applause.
Those who know their history will remember that Zbigniew Brzezinski was directly involved in the funding and arming of Islamic extremists in Pakistan and Afghanistan in order to weaken the Soviets.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
By the way, Osama bin Laden just happened to be one of these anti-Soviet freedom fighters that the U.S. was funding and arming. This operation is no secret at this point, nor are the unintended side effects.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work.
Officially, the U.S. government's arming and funding of the Mujahideen was a response to the Soviet invasion in December of 1979. However, in his memoir entitled From the Shadows, Robert Gates, director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., and Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, revealed that the U.S. actually began the covert operation 6 months prior with the express intention of luring the Soviets into a quagmire. The strategy worked. The Soviets invaded, and the 10 years of war that followed are considered by many historians as being one of the primary causes of the fall of the USSR. This example doesn't just establish precedent. What we're seeing happen in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria right now is actually a continuation of an old story.
We're sitting down with Michael Scheuer, the man who had served in the CIA for more than 20 years, up until 2004. At one time, he was the chief of the CIA bin Laden unit. Then he went and exposed how counter-effective Washington's methods were in the fight against terror. Let's talk about Syria.
Yes.
Syria says the earth will start shaking if anyone intervenes in their internal affairs. How badly does the U.S. Is the U.S. trying to interfere?
Oh, I think we're interfering unconscionably. Until they removed the U.S. ambassador, he was running around the country trying to encourage groups to overthrow the Syrian government. That is not the role of any diplomat, United States or Russian or Chinese or British. We have really very cold-bloodedly urged Syrians to get out on the street knowing that they're going to get shot down by their government. Again, Syria is a country where there is no U.S. interest. Since I was a little boy, we've been afraid of the Syrians, and if you look at the map, it's hard to imagine that little blot of country called Syria could be a threat to the United States.
The CIA has reportedly worked with the Syrian opposition for years.
Well, I'm not sure we worked with the Syrian opposition. We've certainly worked with the Syrian
WikiLeaks
government.
Cables,
well, I haven't. Yeah. Well, then, if it's there, it's there. But our relationship with the Syrians is really a relatively unimportant one. But again, it's another very good example of the dichotomy in the thinking of American leaders. Because as we call for democracy in Syria, if Assad goes, Israel's security goes straight down.
If the region becomes a complete mess, doesn't Washington see any dangers to Israel? I mean, with Iran involved, it won't be pretty.
I think that's exactly right, ma'am. I don't know what the thinking is, except that they have come down on the belief that democracy is better for everybody. And the truth is, American and Western foreign policy interests in the Middle East have depended for 50 years on the maintenance of tyranny. Tyranny that gave us access to oil, tyranny that protected Israel, and in the last 20 years, tyrannies that persecuted Islamists to protect us. All of that is going by the wayside. And to the Israelis' credit, the Israelis are the only ones who have stood up and said, democracy may not be very good for our security, and they couldn't be more correct.
About Iran, what's Washington's plan for Iran?
Whatever Israel's plan is for Iran. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats, are deathly afraid that the Israelis will attack them off their own hook. And if Israel attacks Iran, the Americans will get blamed for condoning it, whether we did or not. So I think what we're seeing is a slow, almost inexorable advance toward some kind of a conflict with Iran.
Illegal, ineffective, and unnecessary. That is essentially what the 5-member Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board said about the National Security Agency's collection of phone data from millions of Americans. Jim Dempsey, a member of the government-appointed board, voted for the blistering report.
We have never once found evidence of a plot, never once identified an unknown terrorist plotting attacks on the homeland or anywhere else. One time we found a guy who was raising money for the Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group in Somalia, which is a serious crime.
But that's it?
But A, that's it. B, the FBI probably was circling around him anyhow already and would have come across him anyhow.